Today, we're diving into something that's, well, it's reshaping the very fabric of British society. And this isn't just about house prices, you know? It's about security, it's about family, it's about the future. We're talking about the UK's housing emergency. Okay, I want to start with just a number. No context, just the number. 175,990. Just let that sink in for a second. It's a number that honestly represents a profound failure.
Because that number, that's how many children in England are homeless, living without a permanent place to call home. To put that in perspective, that's like an entire city of kids. Think about the size of Leeds, all living in temporary accommodation. It's a staggering figure, and it really is at the absolute heart of this whole crisis. So you have to ask, right? How on earth did it come to this? How does one of the wealthiest nations in the world end up with so many of its kids effectively homeless? It just doesn't add up.
Well, the immediate trigger, the thing that really kicked this all off, was a massive economic shock. A shockwave that ripped through the entire system. And it all started with the Bank of England.
So, to try and get a handle on inflation, the Bank of England basically slammed on the emergency brake. Think about this. In 2021, the base rate was at a historic low, just 0.1%. Then, boom, it skyrocketed to 5.25%. Now, it's eased a little bit since then, but make no mistake, we are living in a completely different financial world. This right here, this was the trigger.
And here's what that actually looks like for people. All of a sudden, mortgages just became way, way more expensive. Look at that standard variable rate, that SVR, over 7%. For millions of people coming off of those really cheap fixed rate deals, this was a sudden, massive financial shock, a real gut punch. And if you want to see the impact in just one stark figure, here it is. The monthly mortgage payment for an average home has jumped by 61% since 2021. Let me say that again, 61%. That one change, that single jump, completely fractured the entire property market. So with buying a home suddenly off the table for so many people, all that pressure, all that demand, it didn't just vanish. It had to go somewhere. And it was all funneled directly into the rental market, creating what can only be described as a perfect storm. Okay, so just picture this. On one side, you've got a flood of people who can't afford to buy a house anymore. On the other side, you've got a shrinking pool of rental properties to fight over. The supply is down by nearly a quarter from pre-pandemic levels, partly because landlords are just selling up. It's a simple and honestly a brutal equation. Way too much demand, not nearly enough supply. And here's the results. Rents are at record highs across the whole country. I mean, look at London, over £2,200 a month on average. That's just unaffordable for so many. But here's the really interesting and kind of scary thing on this slide. See how the annual change is slowing down? You might think that's good news, but it's not. It's actually a sign that tenants have hit a wall. They've reached their absolute financial limit. They literally cannot pay anymore. And the competition out there, it is absolutely ferocious. For every single property that comes up for rent, you've got an average of almost 5 tenants trying to get it. And in some places, that number is over 10. It's just a desperate scramble. So with this crisis raging, the government had to do something. And they've responded with the biggest intervention in the rental market in a generation. It's a bold move for sure, but it's also a very, very risky gamble, and it's all designed to protect tenants. Now, at the very heart of this new law is the end of something called Section 21. You've probably heard it called no-fault evictions. For decades, this basically meant a landlord could kick you out without giving any reason at all. Imagine the instability that creates for renters. Well, that is now set to be abolished. And that's not all. It's actually part of a much bigger package. This new Renters' Rights Act brings in some really sweeping changes. We're talking about banning rent bidding wars, giving tenants the right to ask to have a pet, and for the first time ever, applying a decent home standard to the private rental sector. It really is a huge shift in the balance of power between landlords and tenants. But, and this is the big but, here's the fundamental tension. On the one hand, the goal is to give tenants way more security. But on the other hand, the risk is that all these new rules on top of other tax changes could just push more landlords to sell up, which would shrink the rental market even more. One survey found that 41% of landlords are thinking about it. So you get this big question, will protecting tenants accidentally make the housing supply crisis even worse? Because, while politicians and experts debate all of this, the human cost is already spiraling out of control. This is the point where the numbers on a spreadsheet become real people's lives.
This is the number of entire households. We're talking families, couples, single people, all living in temporary accommodation right now in England. And that number has gone up by 7% in just 1 year.
And here's the price tag. £2.7 billion. That's how much local councils spent in just 1 year on temporary accommodation. Just think about that. That's money that isn't being spent on building new homes or fixing up parks or funding labourers. It's a completely crippling, unsustainable cost. And look, the impact goes so much further than just not having a roof over your head. This quote, this really brings it home. Homelessness isn't just a housing crisis. It's an education crisis. It's a health crisis. It is scarring the next generation. You see, the long-term effects of all this are just profound. It's not just about delaying people's lives. It's fundamentally changing the future of the entire country.
I mean, just look at this chart. The UK's fertility rate has dropped to a record low of 1.41. You need 2.1 just to keep the population stable. It's pretty simple, really. When people can't find a secure, stable home, they put off having kids or decide not to have them at all. The housing crisis has now become a demographic crisis. And this chart really shows you part of the reason why. More than a quarter of young adults, people between 20 and 34, are still living at home with their parents. That fundamental milestone of just starting your own independent life, it's being put on hold for millions. So what this all means is that housing isn't a ladder for social mobility anymore. For so many, it's become a wall. Your chance of owning a home is less about how hard you work or what you save, and more about whether you have a bank of mom and dad to help you out. And what that's doing is creating and hardening a new kind of class divide, one based entirely on housing. Which kind of leaves us with one last big question. For generations, a home was supposed to be a place of security, right? The foundation for a family, a cornerstone of society. But when that same home becomes a source of crippling debt, of constant insecurity, of deep inequality, what is it then? When a house is no longer a home, what does it become?